and welcome to our podcast, English Master Key or Latin American Track. Today we are asking a simple but uncomfortable question. Does English truly open doors, or can it also create new forms of inequality? To explore that question, we draw on two main sources. Johanna López Urbina's language education policy and the article Neoliberal Agendas in English Language Education in Urban Latin America, The Case of Medellín, by Paula Andrea Echeverri Sucerquia and Cristian Andrés Medina Rúa. We will also use a few examples from the broader materials behind this podcast, such as Canada, Brazil, and Uruguay. Today, we will move through three ideas. How language policy shapes what counts as valuable knowledge, how English becomes tied to development and competitiveness, and how multilingual identities can be weakened when English is treated as the only serious goal.
First off, language policy is not just a technical document. As López Urbina explains, it affects curriculum, teacher training, assessment, and the social value attached to languages.
I share that view, Astrid, and I think that matters because policy is never neutral. When a government gives one language more time, more resources, and more visibility, it is also saying whose language deserves prestige.
Exactly. López Urbina distinguishes between status planning and corpus planning. Status planning changes the social position of a language, while corpus planning affects its form or structure.
So, when English is placed at the center of education, it gains status. Other languages may still exist, but they become secondary in the school imagination.
And that is where the problem begins. When one language becomes the main measure of success, students may be judged more by their English score than by their creativity, local knowledge, or multilingual reality.
That's a great point, Astrid, because it's a bit like installing a global operating system and forgetting that the country already has its own files. The system may run, but not everyone benefits equally.
Now, to be fair, there is an argument in favor of English that we should not ignore. English does open doors in education, work, tourism, and international communication. In Medellín, bilingualism is linked to technology, business, and global competitiveness.
In addition to that, Hernan, the article by Echeverri Sucerquia and Medina Rúa shows that English is the most used foreign language in the Aburrá Valley, appearing in educational, commercial, and tourist settings.
So yes, from one perspective, English can function as assets. It can help students participate in a wider world.
But the same article showed the contradiction. Access is not equal. Students from higher socioeconomic levels tend to perform much better than students from lower socioeconomic levels.
Okay, guys, so that means the policy sounds inclusive, but in practice it often benefits the same groups that already have private courses, more exposure, and better resources.
So the issue is not English itself. The issue is the way it is positioned as a requirement without guaranteeing the conditions needed to reach that requirement.
Canada is a good reminder that language is not just culture. It is also access to jobs, promotion, and economic mobility.
And this is where the neoliberal side of the discussion becomes important, Hernan. In Medellín, for example, bilingualism is linked to economic growth, technological development, and competitiveness.
Yes, and that is why languages start to be treated almost like a product. English becomes something that you need to have in order to be employable.
Exactly. The article shows how this commodifies language. English is no longer just a communication tool. It becomes market value tied to productivity and labor demands.
Yeah, that's the point. It creates pressure on schools. Instead of asking what language learning means for identity, community, or intercultural understanding, the system keeps asking whether students can compete.
I completely agree with you, Astrid. That is why development plans that celebrate human talent and competitiveness can sound attractive while hiding structural inequality.
Uruguay give us a practical example here. In the absence of enough qualified teachers in rural areas, the country used telepresence so the schools could connect with English teachers remotely.
Honestly, that solution is creative, but it also shows the scale of the problem. If policy needs technology to fill basic gaps, then the gap is already deep.
Mhm.
Another key point is that Colombian is not only an English learning contest. It is also a multilingual country with our indigenous or Creole languages that deserve recognition.
And yet, in many policies, those languages do not receive the same institutional weight as English.
That's a great point, Hernan, because the Medellín article also points out that the emphasis on English can contradict the multilingual agenda stated in national policies. The intention to preserve native and Creole language is often not visible in the development plans analyzed.
It really matters because language is not only a school subject. Language carries memory, culture, and belonging.
Brazil makes this tension even clearer. In elite bilingual schools, English is often separated from Portuguese in a strict monoglossic model, as if the two languages could not live together.
And I'd like to add that real multilingual speakers do not use rigid walls. They move across languages, mix them, and draw on other linguistic resources. That is closer to a translanguaging or heteroglossic model.
For sure, in real life, multilingual communication is flexible. Students do not speak in sealed compartments.
So, when one language is favored and others are treated as symbolic or optional, the educational system sends a message about whose identity counts.
In that sense, guys, language policy can either protect diversity or make it invisible.
Now, let's think a little about the classroom. If policies demand high English levels, but schools do not have enough trained teachers, materials, or continuity, then the policy becomes disconnected from reality.
Taking your idea further, I think we should also consider that standardized testing makes this even narrower. It often measures isolated skills instead of real communication. It also misses multilingual practices, local knowledge, and the way students actually use language in daily life.
That makes a lot of sense. There is also a learning myth with questioning. The idea that the younger the student starts, the better the result. In foreign language settings, that is not automatically true.
Yes, starting earlier does not guarantee stronger results if exposure is limited to a few hours a week. Methodology, intensity, and continuity matter more.
And that, my colleagues, is where the biological discussion becomes useful but careful. Action development is not only about effort, it is also linked to what speakers can hear and reproduce with enough clarity.
In other words, the classroom should not blame a student for limits that are partly structural. Exposure, context, and site all matters.
So bilingualism should not mean replacing one language with another. It should mean expanding students' repertoires without erasing where they come from. So, to conclude, English can be a useful tool, but it should not become the only measure of educational success.
Yeah, and on top of that, language policy should not just prepare a student for the market.
And it should also protect identity, cultural diversity, and real inclusion.
The main lesson here is that language education is a social and political process, not only an academic one.
And if policy ignores inequality, it may produce it.
But if policy values multilingualism and local realities, it becomes fairer and more meaningful.
So, thank you for Listen to our podcast and see you next time.